What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review as we are kicking off the new year with kind of a big one already in terms of Swedish melodic death metal. I am talking about the latest offering from the Halo Effect, March of the Unheard. This comes out on January 10th on Nuclear Blast Records, and this is the band's second full-length studio effort overall. And of course, yeah, this is largely a supergroup of current and former members of In Flames, but also, well, actually, I think they're all former members of In Flames, except, well, actually, he used to be in Flames, never mind, Michael Stan from Dark Tranquillity, but I always think of him being in Dark Tranquillity rather than In Flames. You get the idea. But yeah, so I actually didn't check out their debut that came out a few years ago, and I heard mixed opinions about it, so I was a little bit curious about how this album was going to go, and, well, this is pretty much standard Gothenburg, Sweden melodic death metal, but there are some cool extra wrinkles thrown into the threads a little bit on this album. Kicking things off with Conspire to Deceive. You know, you pretty much start off with like a really cool melodeath melody, and then it gets into some classic heavy metal riffs and rhythms. Although, one thing I didn't expect out of this album was the amount of groove that comes in on this album. Like, I would say about a good 60% of this album has some pretty solid grooves, although sometimes they can kind of run into each other in terms of sounding similar. But you do get some pretty cool groove on this album to kind of break up standard melodeath tropes. But, of course, the big tropes that are always in melodeath do show up on here. Like, pretty much every single song, for the most part, has great guitar harmonies and lead melodies. Granted, there are some that can kind of sound a little bit repetitive and a little kind of samey, but they're performed pretty damn well. Detonate, the second track, this one gets into a little bit more high energy. Like, there's some cool, like, classic heavy metal gallops. There's also some more riffs, like pronounced riffs that come up on here as opposed to just the melody. And the bass guitar actually stands out on this track. And this is where you start getting into a bit of a run on the first half of the album where the choruses are really big. The chorus on Detonate was one of the bigger choruses across the album. And then our channel to the Darkness starts off with an acoustic melody before it gets into like a gallop, but it's more lumbering, like it kind of lumbers on for a bit, punches you right in the face with some thrash. And this is one of my favorite tropes of melodic death metal, is that like thrash metal influence, and this is one of only a few songs on the album where you get that like thrashy melodeath of At the Gates and even a little bit of Carcass. But there's even like a good amount of the harmonies, especially on this track, definitely make me think of In Flames, but also like Death Clock, you know, that side of melodeath where it sounds a little bit more sinister. And then Cruel Perception, this one, like, the guitar tuning is a little bit different, and it kind of gives it a more uplifting feeling. Like, it almost borders on Finnish melodic death metal, where there's a little bit of a power metal influence coming in. Like, uplifting melodies, it gets into double time, and clean verses, but with a heavy chorus. And then What We Become, dark harmonies and military snare to kind of add a little bit of an extra darker vibe to the band. And this song was one of the heavier songs on the album and one of the darker tracks on the album. Like, the riffs kind of come across a little bit more evil, and the melodies even get a little bit more sinister. And even though, yeah, this album, for the most part, there's, like, no true blue solo except for one track, the lead melodies are really gorgeous, especially on What We Become. This Curse of Silence, it was just a 2-minute instrumental, but there's some cool wailing, some cool gorgeous melodies that kind of give it a little bit of a folky vibe, and it leads directly into the title track where it's a little bit more somber and a little bit more of that, like, Finnish melodic death metal / power metal influence shows up, but more groove. But it definitely feels more somber, but of course you do get more like double time energy to kind of give it a little bit of like a like Wolfheart, maybe a little Insomnium kind of vibes to it, which I can certainly appreciate. Forever Astray, we get back into the thrashy side of melodeath on here, and it's another one of those more riff forward tracks on the album, and there's even some death metal triplet swings going on here, but with those harmonies on top, it made for a really cool dynamic. And this is actually one of 2 tracks where Michael Stan actually does his clean vocals, and they were really, really tasty. A Death That Becomes Us, dare I say, the opening melody kind of gets a little bit boogie-ish. I don't know if that's really something, but kind of you can almost boogie along to it. But the riffs get a little bit chunkier on top of a groove to kind of give it a little bit of more of a straight-up death metal vibe, but it does get back into more somber melodies at times. The Burning Point, more atonal melodies, which I actually think the Burning Point here was one of the main standouts on the album because it was more about atonal melodies rather than standard melodies, and there's some triplet gallops, it gets thrashy again, grooves, some tribal drums, and this was the one song on the album that had like a true blue solo, and it was harmonized. Like, both guitarists absolutely slay on this track. And then you close out with another instrumental with Coda, which was mostly strings and acoustic melodies, and it's a somber track. And then one other song I forgot to mention that came after Forever Astray, Between Directions, which was the longest track of the album at 4.5 minutes. A little more folky and a little symphonic at the beginning, and it's one of the other darker, more suspenseful, dramatic songs. But again, it still gets heavier, and there's clean vocals in the chorus, and the grooves and the lead melodies were pretty damn tasty on here. So, yeah, for the most part, I enjoyed this album. My main complaints, though, would be kind of the complaint I have about some of these Gothenburg melodeath bands, is that they tend to kind of do the same ideas over and over again, like following the same tropes. And while they do a pretty good job at it, I would have loved to have heard less groove, little more thrash, maybe a little bit more of the old school death metal side of melodeath, and I think it would have made this album something else. But overall, this is still a good offering. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. We're off to a good start with a good album. It's not fantastic or anything like that, but for what it is, it's enjoyable, it's solid, you know. I mean, again, some of these songs kind of sound similar at times, especially with the tropes it's going for, but it's still good nonetheless. But of course, those were just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep your horns high, and
I pressed the wrong button. I'm so sorry! Bitch.
Apologies for that little difficulty moment, hence why I inserted Kazuchika Okada in there for it, because it's a funny gag. Ha ha ha. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.